On March 14, 1987, a woman named Patricia Hendricks walked into the emergency room of St. Catherine's Hospital in Portland, Maine, carrying a porcelain doll wrapped in a blood-soaked pillowcase. Her hands were shaking so violently that she dropped it twice on the linoleum floor. The nurses said she wouldn't let go of it, couldn't let go of it. When they finally pried her fingers away, they found deep scratches carved into her palms, scratches that spelled out 3 letters over and over again. Her. The doll's name, they later discovered, was also carved into the base of its neck. But Patricia Hendricks had never owned a doll. She'd never even seen this one before that morning, when she woke to find it sitting on her chest, staring down at her with glass eyes that seemed to follow her across the room. What you're about to hear are 7 documented cases of cursed dolls that didn't just haunt their owners. They destroyed them. In the autumn of 1994, an antique dealer named Marcus Webb purchased an estate lot from a deceased woman's home in Savannah, Georgia. Among the items was a Victorian-era bride doll, approximately 18 inches tall, dressed in yellowed lace that smelled faintly of rosewater and something else, something like copper. The doll had been kept in a locked trunk in the attic, wrapped in newspaper from 1952. The headline read, "Local woman dies in sleep, no cause found." Marcus placed the doll in his shop window on October 3rd. By October 5th, 3 customers had complained about the doll moving its head. Marcus laughed it off as coincidence. The vibrations from passing traffic, the settling of old porcelain. On October 7th, he woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of his shop alarm. The police found nothing disturbed, nothing stolen, except the bride doll was no longer in the window. It was sitting behind the counter, facing the register, facing where Marcus stood every day. He moved it back. It returned. Every single night for 2 weeks, the doll moved itself from the window to the counter. Marcus installed cameras. The footage showed nothing but static at exactly 3:17 a.m. each night. Then the doll would simply be in a different location when the feed returned. On October 23rd, Marcus Webb married a woman he'd met only 4 days earlier. His friends said he seemed dazed, distant, like he was sleepwalking through his own wedding. She wore a dress identical to the doll's. They found Marcus 3 days later, hanging in his shop, dressed in a suit from the 1890s that no one could identify. The bride doll was never recovered, but 6 months later, it appeared in an estate sale in Charleston. The cycle, it seems, had only just begun. They found little Thomas in the walls of a demolished orphanage in Liverpool, England, in 2001. The building had stood since 1847 and was being converted into luxury apartments when workers discovered a sealed cavity behind a brick wall in the basement. Inside was a wooden doll, crudely carved, with black button eyes and a stitched cloth body. Pinned to its chest was a note in child's handwriting. "He takes the lonely ones." The construction crew thought it was a time capsule, some Victorian child's forgotten toy. They gave it to the foreman's daughter, Emma, who was 7 years old. Emma loved little Thomas immediately. She carried him everywhere, spoke to him in whispers, set a place for him at dinner. Her parents found it endearing at first, children and their imaginations. But Emma began to change. She stopped playing with other children. She stopped speaking to her parents entirely, communicating only through little Thomas, holding him up to her ear as if he were whispering secrets. Her mother noticed Emma's vocabulary changing, using words no 7-year-old should know, phrases in languages Emma had never learned. One night, Emma's father heard her laughing in her room at 2 in the morning. When he opened the door, Emma was standing in the corner, facing the wall. Little Thomas clutched to her chest. She was laughing, but the sound was wrong. Too deep, too old. When her father touched her shoulder, she turned around, and he said later that Emma's eyes looked like someone else was staring out from behind them. Someone ancient. Someone waiting. The family burned little Thomas the next day, watching the flames consume the cloth and char the wood. Emma seemed to recover. For 3 days, she was herself again. On the 4th day, Emma walked into her parents' bedroom and placed something on their dresser. It was little Thomas, completely intact, smelling of smoke but untouched by fire. They moved out that night and never returned. The doll, according to records, was donated to a charity shop in Manchester. It sold within hours. Margot came from Prague. A collector named David Chen acquired her at an underground auction in 2008, paying nearly $15,000 for what the seller described as a genuine 18th century cursed doll from the estate of a convicted witch. David was a skeptic. He collected occult items as curiosities, conversation pieces, nothing more. Margot was exquisite. Hand-painted features, real human hair woven into intricate braids, clothing stitched with symbols David couldn't identify. He displayed her in his study behind glass, properly preserved. The first incident occurred within 48 hours. David's cat, a 12-year-old tabby named Copper, refused to enter the study. When David carried him in, the cat became violent, clawing deep gouges into David's arms, yowling in a way David had never heard before. The cat died 3 days later, no medical explanation. Then David's girlfriend Susan began having nightmares. Every night, the same dream. She was trapped in a room filled with dolls, all of them turning to look at her at once, their heads moving in perfect unison. In the center of the room sat Margot, growing larger with each dream until she towered over everything, her painted smile stretching wider and wider until it split her face open. Susan refused to stay at David's apartment anymore. She said she could feel Margot watching her, even from behind the glass. Even when she left the room, David started hearing the music box, faint, tinny, playing a melody he almost recognized. It came from the study, always at dusk, always the same tune. But Margot had no music box mechanism. David checked, disassembled the bass, found nothing. The music continued. On December 19th, 2008, David Chen was admitted to a psychiatric facility after neighbors reported him screaming about dolls in the walls. He claimed Margot had told him things about his childhood no one else could know, things about how his mother really died, things about what was waiting for him. David Chen remains institutionalized. He draws the same image over and over, a doll with braided hair and a smile that stretches beyond the edges of the paper. Margot was seized by authorities and supposedly destroyed. But in 2015, a doll matching her exact description appeared in an online auction, listed by an anonymous seller in Berlin. The listing was removed within an hour. No explanation given. No one knows the companion's real name. It changes. Every owner reports a different name carved into its back, always in fresh wood, as if newly etched. The doll itself is unremarkable at first glance. A simple rag doll, roughly 2 feet tall, with button eyes and a permanent stitched smile. But everyone who sees it describes the same feeling, an overwhelming sense of loneliness, followed immediately by relief when looking at the doll. As if it understands, as if it's been waiting for you specifically. The first documented case comes from Osaka, Japan, in 1979. A widower named Hiroshi Tanaka found the companion at a flea market and brought it home, thinking of his late wife who'd collected dolls. Within a week, Hiroshi stopped leaving his house. Neighbors grew concerned after 2 months of no sightings. Police entered the home to find Hiroshi sitting at his kitchen table, the companion in the chair opposite him, 2 place settings laid out. Hiroshi was emaciated, barely alive, but he was smiling. He kept saying he finally had someone who listened, someone who understood, someone who would never leave. Hiroshi recovered physically, but he was never the same. He spent the rest of his life trying to find the companion again, convinced it was the only thing that truly understood his grief. He died alone in 2003, and according to his landlord, they found a rag doll sitting on his chest when they discovered the body. It was donated to a charity. The companion appeared next in Toronto in 1985, then Dublin in 1991, then Seattle in 1998. Each time, the same pattern. An isolated person finds the doll. They become obsessed. They stop eating, stop sleeping, spending every moment with their new companion. When they're finally discovered, they're always smiling, always insisting the doll is the only friend they've ever needed. And they're always found with the doll touching them, on them, close enough to whisper. The most disturbing aspect isn't the obsession. It's what happens after the doll is removed. Every single person who's owned the companion reports the same thing in the days following separation. They can still hear it calling to them. Late at night, in the spaces between sleeping and waking, they hear a voice that sounds like their own, begging them to come back, promising that this time they'll never be lonely again. Most return to searching for the doll. Some succeed. Sister Mary came from a convent in rural France, dating back to the 1650s. The doll was supposedly used to teach young novices about caring for children, a practice doll for future missionary work. But the records tell a different story. Between 1653 and 1661, 7 nuns died in that convent. All of them were found in the chapel at dawn, kneeling before the altar, with Sister Mary positioned in their arms as if they were cradling an infant. All 7 had expressions of absolute terror frozen on their faces. The convent was abandoned in 1662, sealed by order of the Catholic Church, and remained untouched for over 300 years. In 1989, a historian named Dr. Claire Beaumont received permission to excavate the site for her research on 17th century monastic life. Sister Mary was discovered in a sealed iron box, buried beneath the chapel floor, wrapped in chains and surrounded by salt and religious texts. The box had been welded shut. Dr. Beaumont had it carefully opened at the University of Lyon. Sister Mary was pristine, untouched by decay, her habit still deep black, her wooden face smooth and unblemished. The preservation was remarkable, impossible, some said. Dr. Beaumont became fascinated. She kept Sister Mary in her office, photographed her, documented every detail. Her colleagues noticed Claire spending more and more time alone with the doll. They'd pass her office late at night and see her talking to it, positioning it carefully, adjusting its habit. When they asked, Claire said she was conducting behavioral research, understanding the psychology of object attachment in isolated religious communities. But her notebooks told a different story. The entries became increasingly erratic, speaking about Sister Mary's preferences, her moods, her needs. Claire wrote that Sister Mary didn't like being alone, that she required company during the night hours, that she had specific requests. On November 3rd, 1989, Dr. Claire Beaumont was found in the university chapel at dawn, kneeling before a makeshift altar she'd constructed, Sister Mary cradled in her arms. Claire was catatonic, unresponsive but alive. She remained in that state for 6 weeks before she suddenly began speaking. She said Sister Mary had shown her the truth, that the nuns hadn't died. They'd been chosen. They'd been invited to understand something vast and terrible about devotion, about sacrifice, about what truly watches from behind the veil of faith. Claire Beaumont died 3 days later from a brain aneurysm. Sister Mary was returned to church custody and supposedly destroyed in a consecrated fire. But in 2017, a documentary crew investigating haunted religious artifacts in France filmed something in an abandoned monastery in Provence. In the footage, visible for only 3 frames, is a nun doll sitting alone in a dusty chapel. The documentary never aired, the crew disbanded, and no one involved will discuss what else they found in that monastery. You've heard of Robert the Doll, Key West, Florida, the Jean Otto house, the doll given to young Robert Eugene Otto in 1906 by a Bahamian servant who supposedly practiced black magic. The stories are famous. The doll moving on its own, the giggling heard in the attic, the requirement to ask permission before taking his photograph or face his curse. Thousands visit him each year at the Fort East Martello Museum, where he sits behind glass, dressed in his white sailor suit, clutching his stuffed lion. But what they don't tell you on the tours is about the letters. The museum receives dozens every month from people who photographed Robert without permission. Letters begging for forgiveness, describing accidents, illnesses, deaths in the family, businesses failing, relationships destroyed. All of it, they claim, started the moment they disrespected Robert. The museum has a wall of these letters pleading for Robert to lift his curse. Dear Robert, I'm sorry I didn't ask permission. Since visiting you, my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. Please forgive me. Please stop. But here's what keeps the museum staff awake at night. Robert's position changes. They carefully document his placement each evening when they lock up. Arms at a certain angle, head tilted just so, the lion positioned in a specific way. But security footage shows nothing, just empty frames of static at random times during the night. And when they return in the morning, Robert has moved. Just slightly. Just enough to notice. His head turned a few degrees more toward the door. His hand shifted on the lion's mane. The staff stopped mentioning it to each other, because acknowledging it made it worse. Some refused to be alone with him. One curator quit after she found herself apologizing to Robert out loud, compulsively, even though she'd done nothing wrong. She said the apology just came out of her mouth, over and over, as if something was pulling the words from her. As if Robert required it. The most disturbing incident occurred in 2013 when a couple visited the museum on their honeymoon. The husband took multiple photos of Robert without asking permission, joking about the curse, taunting the doll. His wife was uncomfortable but said nothing. They left Key West that afternoon. Their car was hit by a drunk driver on Highway 1 3 hours later. The husband survived. The wife didn't. When police recovered the husband's phone from the wreckage, the last photo in his gallery wasn't one he remembered taking. It was a close-up of Robert's face, the angle all wrong, as if the doll had been holding the phone itself. And in the reflection of Robert's glass eyes, you could see two figures, a man and a woman. The woman was screaming. And number one, the most dangerous cursed doll ever documented. The one that's still active, still searching, still claiming victims in ways that make Robert look like a child's toy. But that story, that case file, that evidence requires its own telling. The authorities who investigated it signed non-disclosure agreements. The families involved have never spoken publicly until now. What I'm about to reveal in the next video will change everything you thought you knew about cursed objects. Because this doll doesn't just ruin lives, it takes them methodically, deliberately. And according to the last known report from 2019, it's currently in circulation.